have a slate.
Like
Okay.
it.
Everyone good? All right, action.
Hey everyone, welcome to another great episode of Content and Conversation. Today I'm excited to be welcoming Will Critchlow, CEO of Distilled, all the way down from London, and we're excited to be talking about SERP analysis. Welcome, Will.
Great to be here.
So a good starting point for our conversation, you recently posted a video, or you didn't post it, but you recorded a video for Moz,
Yep.
a Whiteboard Friday, talking about two-tiered SERP that your colleague Tom Capper did a presentation on. So I think it's a good starting point for our conversation. Would love to hear you summarize like that concept and what that means exactly.
Yeah, so this concept that Tom has been coming up with and researching is essentially the idea that if you think back to classical kind of ranking factors, so everything that we're used to having on-page plus off-page ranking factors, all of that stuff was, particularly the link element, the off-site element, was designed to approximate things, right? This is Google saying, if you think back to like reasonable surfer type models and so forth, they're using links as a proxy for other stuff, as a proxy for authority, a proxy for trust and so forth.
Right. Okay.
And Tom's kind of, I guess his hypothesis where he started from was saying they can measure some of that stuff in more directly now, at least in the very competitive head terms.
Right.
And that was kind of, I guess, the thinking behind it was like, oh, like they should be able to measure some of this stuff more directly.
Okay.
And so we then went out and did some research based off. So I think the other thing is he saw that the correlation with some of the link-based factors and rankings had declined gradually over time. So they're still hugely important factors,
Right.
but that correlation had gone down.
Okay.
And so that was the other thing. It was like, oh, is this decreasing as a ranking factor? And so out of that research, he came up with the idea of looking at the difference between the correlation on different kinds of terms and at the top, the top 5 positions, for example, versus 6 to 11 or lower down rankings. And what he found was there is a higher correlation between rankings and link metrics.
Okay.
Lower down in the SERPs.
Makes sense.
So the very top, particularly for competitive head terms, are less correlated with links, which is kind of counterintuitive in some ways. But I think when you start to think that's where Google has the most, they have the most click data, the most data, the most information about how people are interacting with those search results, and potentially they can reorder the SERPs a bit more and say what's going to be best for users in these situations.
Okay.
So there's a lot of speculation going on here, but like this was kind of where
The
where it came from.
thesis. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I saw that transparent. We do a lot of link acquisition, bias potentially coming from my side. But I mean, I agreed with the thesis for sure. That on high velocity search terms, especially with some peak periods, that maybe links are slightly dampened as a ranking factor. I mean, I think there are, one of my concerns when I see that is if clients, and we actually did get a few emails actually about your video.
Sorry about that. I mean, we do this work too. So
yeah. I hear it. Is misconstruing that as like every single search result, every single context, even 1 through 5 isn't as strong.
Yep.
And I mean, not many clients have the liberty of being super high domain authority, probably. So for our purposes, they're normally contacting us when they need that help. But situationally specifically, I remember on his presentation, he spoke to like Mother's Day flowers or Valentine's Day flowers specifically as queries. It makes a lot of sense to me that velocity that it would dampen even more when there's big QDF, query deserves freshness, I think is Google's patent. Would you agree with that thesis, or I don't know if that was kind of a base of his research, or maybe he would need to comment on those kind of things?
I think you're right that we might expect to see even more differences in those situations. I think he went looking there actually from a slightly different angle. So there's a couple of different things. Query deserves freshness. What we might mean 2 different things by that, I think. One is query deserves freshness because of breaking news.
Right.
That to me is the kind of canonical QDF situation.
Yeah, that's fair.
This search result needs different results than it needed yesterday because the world has changed. And that is typically about throwing in brand new results.
That's fair.
Either actual news results or at least pages that have been published since whatever it was in the world happened.
Okay.
You know, I mean, picking I guess a nicer end of that is think about a big sports result or something like that. Like you've got a new World Series champion.
Right.
You want different results for that. The other side is what you're talking about in like the run up to something like Mother's Day is not necessarily that you want the freshest pages to rank, but that you might want different pages than you had yesterday. And that's I think what Tom was kind of getting at there, was kind of saying this is an example where you can see potentially different intent. Like what does somebody mean if they search Mother's Day flowers 6 months away from Mother's Day? That intent is potentially different. I don't even know what it would be.
Yeah,
it's different
that makes
versus if they're searching it 10 days before. And so his idea here was that this might be a case where the search result changes in that way, and so we can investigate it in that way. But I think it's also important to say these results are showing up not just in those kind of QDF type areas. Tying it back to the kind of client work that both of us do, I think one thing that should be reassuring potentially is that good quality work that brings in the kind of links that you might want brings in a lot of the other factors as well, essentially, right? So it can build branded search volume, it can build brand awareness, it can get increased click-through rate, because people are more familiar with it. So all is not lost in that sense, even if the hypothesis is totally true.
Yeah,
so,
that's true. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, and it kind of ties into, you're right, QDF is not the right word to describe that, but it's also I think, acceleration of searches and engagement data for Google, or that would be my thought. And maybe that also, which also ties into another thought about that thesis, is in markets, even if it's like high value, is the fact that it's changing so quickly is because they are now finally getting statistically significant data to re-rank those results.
I wonder. I mean, we're very much out into the world of speculation.
Yeah, we're
now,
guessing.
But yes, I would wonder if that is what's happening, because right now there's a lot of discussion, argument, controversy about the extent to which Google is using engagement data, things like click-through rate from the search results, as a ranking factor.
Yeah,
and
a lot.
We've seen some fairly categorical denials from Google, but they're all
muddy and
I mean they're kind of in this specific situation we're not using that specific factor. Is kind of the typical denial, rather than we're not using any of this data anywhere. So I think there's lots of things get layered in here, but you end up with things like personalization taking effect. I suspect it's not raw click-through rate, but I think there will be some. They're obviously paying attention to this stuff. This is how they evaluate their algorithms. It's how they do the human rater stuff. Is looking at user experience and engagement in the search results. So who knows? We're way out in speculation. But I do think there must be opportunities to do things on high value queries with massive amounts of data that you can't do on a long tail query that you've only seen
they would agree with that.
5 times a month or whatever.
That makes sense. Okay. So we actually have a client very similar to the situation Tom described, where I'd be curious, where is the line? And I guess from an agency perspective, you're probably always picking the highest leverage thing. So maybe in a perfect world, you're just still an element of link building in there. But an example would be they're very high authority on average. So they have those situations where those high velocity peak periods, but they're kind of on the they're still ranking highly, but a few people slightly higher domain authority than them easily could be on the cusp of slipping out of that domain authority lead. Where would your, because to me, even that would be kind of risky to say, stop link building in that scenario. I don't know if you agree with that.
We get into another whole challenging area here. Like, how do you measure link building activity? How do you, tell if you're actually doing the right things? How do you figure out if your strategy is correct? Because there's also such a lag. There's a lot of noise in that data. The areas where we've seen it most categorically, like absolutely, definitely beneficial, is when you've got a case of a client where their domain is just slightly weaker than their key competition, their SERP competition, and they're competing for search results in that kind of like mid-competitive level or long tail. And those are the cases where we've just seen big piece does really well. They bump a whole bunch of numbers kind of go across the board. That's the kind of case where you can just see cause and effect really tight together.
Very clearly.
I think the challenging situation you're describing is like when what you need to be doing is you need to keep on producing that content and you need to carry on getting links because otherwise you'll fall behind. But that's a tough thing to report on because you kind of need the counterfactual. You kind of say to the client, look, if we hadn't done this, things would be going worse rather than we did do this and things are going great. And
that's fair.
I think that's really tough. So I think what we're trying to say in those situations is, yes, we do need to carry on doing this, but we also need to be doing a lot of work on
UX at the same time.
For example, specifically. And I think that's the increasing shift that we're seeing going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing we in that scenario specifically, and for other clients we work on, we're doing a lot of top middle funnel brand awareness type content. So we're seeing the lift in blog traffic very consistently and solid rankings for all the head terms. So that is clear value, I think, I hope. And then and the argument is there at least that it's holding up to the rest of the ship.
Right, build out that foundation. So I think the other thing that I would love to see, actually I'd love to see us do more of it. I don't know to what extent you do this, but when you get into that situation where you've got a pretty powerful domain and the client is competing for some of those big terms. Part of it is UX on the stuff that they already have, but also we should be, I think, probably building out a lot more content than we typically do. Right, so I think you probably actually do more of this. Our work tends to concentrate on bigger content and bigger pieces. I would love to see us say, hey, this is a situation where this client would really benefit from, a knowledge base or a bigger chunk of content where the content is designed to rank, not necessarily to get more.
You're spot on. So there are scenarios where clients have a domain authority lead. Maybe they're just whatever brand awareness reason, it's Pepsi or something, and they're just crushing everyone else. And it might make a lot of sense always to do link acquisition. I do think some of those might be more competitive top middle funnel on average that might could use a few links in order to push them higher. But there are clients that we're only doing content creation for in that exact scenario. So I would agree with you on that thesis. So I'm going back to like these high search volume and it feels like 1 through 5. I don't know, did he look in any B2B spaces specifically?
So one piece of his research was across quite a broad range of keywords. So trying to replicate some of the studies kind of done from the outside. A lot of the ranking factor studies are done by tool providers, which is great. They're the people with the data. So we see stuff come out of Moz, we see stuff come out of Search Metrics, whoever it might be. But Ahrefs had one recently, I think. But trying to replicate some of that kind of agency stuff, like consuming these APIs, downloading this data and trying to replicate some of these studies. And we found kind of interesting things when we do that. And in particular, I think as a reader, I don't know about you, but I find when I read these studies, you're always trying to figure out how much to take away from it. How much is solid data, solid statistics, solid science behind it. How did they make the decision? Well, how did they make the decisions around the experiment design? And I think a lot of that stuff is we don't often go deep enough into this. I certainly don't necessarily.
We just assume it's true, maybe.
And so trying to replicate it is really fascinating. So when Tom did this replication, you end up with all these decisions like, are we looking at mobile SERPs or desktop SERPs? Are we looking at the top 10 positions or the top 50 positions? Are we looking at how do we choose the set of keywords that we're going to look at? And it's only by actually having to make those decisions again, or either try to replicate what they did, but sometimes they don't publish this, or you make your own what you think are sensible decisions. And so I think part of this came out of saying, one of the key differences was one of the Moz studies, I think, looked at the top 50 and was like domain authority correlation with ranking position across the top 50 results. And Tom was like, well, I want to look more narrowly at the top 10.
Gotcha.
And
that's fair.
Then get different correlations out of that. So some of these were B2B, but I don't think he's done it. I don't think he's done a specific B2B study. So that could be it could be interesting to kind of segment by keyword type or group.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I bring that up, leading question almost, because I do see a lot of, and maybe it goes back to the search volume velocity and volume generally. Most B2B spaces, maybe there's some exceptions, the volume isn't significant. So at least my thesis, again, we're just postulating at this point, is if it's a lower search volume on average, they don't have the data, therefore domain authority is a higher ranking for, or page authority is a higher ranking factor in this case. I don't know if that seems fair to you, or you would think? I'm sure they'd like to do more, but I'm just wondering what else is like as statistically significant if it's 1,000 searches a month. You mentioned mobile, desktop.
I think all these things. So I mean, the other thing with B2B is on average, smaller websites with lower authority than in some of the consumer spaces oftentimes end up with their search competitors being more consumer space domains, right? You might be ranking against big media sites or whatever else, depending on the keyword. And
Right,
so,
okay.
I think certainly some of our case studies where we've got those very effective, we did this piece and look at the metrics. Some of those are, B2B.
Okay. Oh, I guess one other thing I think about with SERP analysis and on that study is just the idea of kind of the blended intent SERP.
Right.
That's where it gets dicey too, where I'd see like, are there almost micro DA or like DA rankings based on, somewhat like an example might be content marketing, maybe a blend, someone's searching for content marketing tools, someone else just wants the definition. So maybe Google only wants to rank 2 based on they know 2 out of 10 users, or I don't know, I'm just making this up, 2 out of 10 want that result. Therefore, it's a ranking based on those 2. So if you just look at that, maybe that one has really high DA and it's low, and then the top, I don't know. These are all dicey pieces. Yeah.
You're absolutely right in theory. I have no idea how we'd analyze that. Because there's everything from the full-on universal blended SERP, so where you've got news results or map results or video results, where it's kind of obvious, or at least you can figure it out, right?
Right.
There are even if they're kind of blended in, when you view source on the search results page, you can see that this is like in a box. Google's like, these are different.
Yeah.
I think that doesn't normally happen in the cases you're talking about are more like search result diversity, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Where they're kind of saying, yes, we want, somebody like in your examples, it's content marketing. We need some content marketing tools. We need some content marketing definitions. We also need some content marketing agencies or whatever.
Yeah, hopefully.
And imagine a case where, you can easily imagine a case where if you were designing that search result by hand, like if there was an editor of that search result, they might say, we want 2 of those kind of results, 2 of those kind of results, 2 of those kind of results, and both of these are more powerful than any of those, but you still want the blend.
Yeah.
So I think you're entirely right, that could happen. but from a SERP analysis perspective, how do we think about that? How do we go about attacking it? I don't think it's going to be tractable with any of the kind of correlation studies that we've seen to date. What we would need in there is probably more, there'd be applications for machine learning, conceivably, but you need volume, you need scale. And how would you tag it? How would you label it? How would you train it? I don't know. There's some interesting questions.
Yeah, it gets dicey for sure. But all things to think. I'm curious how you guys think about it from an agency perspective when you're doing work for your clients, like, or maybe there's something that comes top of mind of where you've done SERP analysis and they were doing things one way, you told them to do it another way.
So we edge away from the content end of things here, but we certainly are doing that kind of stuff we're doing more testing.
Okay.
So just like on-page changes that aren't necessarily about writing new content or pushing out stuff designed to get links, but where we're saying, hey, if you update the structured markup on this page, or you update the meta information on this page, you might get a better click-through rate from the search results. And that it's kind of aligned with some of the things we're talking about here. In those cases, we're trying to do that at scale and trying to test that. And that's kind of the big development area for us. This is where we're investing in the software side. But when it comes to the more creative end of content creation, you can't test that when you're talking about big content. That you're not putting out 50,000 pieces of it, right? You're talking about putting out one, 10, like best case,
sense.
but you're not going to get kind of statistical data out of that. So I think we just have to, in a lot of those cases, I think we have to fall back on, it's kind of like the user experience argument. You kind of have to fall back on, what are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to do for the user? What are we trying to, how does this align with their market? How does this align with their overarching strategy? But then it's a reporting challenge. Then you're trying to tie together, okay, was this a good idea? Did it work? These are the kind of things that are tough, hard questions to answer.
Okay. So on your A/B testing software, I'm curious, and I've seen some of your studies and things like that. What is the most common thing that you mentioned to me earlier before we started filming that you're testing for UX, you're trying to make a UX improvement recommendation and also an SEO, while making sure SEO is maintained at the same time, therefore might create a lift. I don't know if there's something most common that you see clients doing wrong that you more often default to, or what?
There's a few kind of surprising things in there, I guess. So there's, I think one of the things that we want to write about soon actually is a bunch of stuff that doesn't work.
Okay.
Right. So we've run many of these tests across lots of different client sites. Yeah. And there are some recommendations that people are still making that we have never seen a positive uplift out of. Some of them they're not negative either. They're just like, this just makes no difference, people. So
what are those?
there are some of them that you might want to do for other reasons, but for example, things like image alt attributes.
Okay.
Like we've literally never seen a positive test out of that. So it's possible it's a ranking factor that Google cares what's in your image alt attributes, but it's not a very powerful one.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean,
don't
I think
change
we
your
kind of knew those kind of things
Right.
from first principles, but there's that side of it. I think look, more at the kind of strategic mistake, I think probably the biggest thing that we've seen is redesigns, reskinning of websites without thinking only about the UX impact, thinking only about the CRO impact, and not thinking about the SEO impact of that.
Okay.
And now that we're able to measure both those things in a controlled environment, in a test, we've seen multiple cases where you've got a version that is better for users in terms of it's got better user metrics and it's converting better, but it ranks worse. And these are typically, because they're big redesign projects, they're typically launched in a kind of big bang fashion.
Okay.
If you think about how that just executes.
Just happens. Yeah.
You kind of you do a bunch of user research, you do a bunch of user testing, and then one day you turn it on, and very rarely do you then go back and turn it off again, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing that there are shockingly high numbers of things that test better for users that rank less well.
Yes.
Not just for the obvious reasons. Like we've all seen the cases where, like Hulu did their big redesign where they put everything in JavaScript rendering and it wasn't accessible to Googlebot and Google couldn't execute it, and they just see that kind of like tank. I'm not talking about things like that. I'm talking about like this is a reasonably sensible. This might pass a kind of tech
Eye
audit,
test.
like
Or
an SEO
even
audit type thing.
even audit.
It's not obviously worse.
Okay.
It's just is worse. And
Yeah.
you haven't tested it, and so I think we're kind of saying we just want to see that stuff thought about in a more integrated fashion. We want to test it for users, but we also want to test and say, how's Google going to?
Have you succeeded in someone is about to launch a redesign and you got them to pause and like reshift and then solve for the problem?
We had one big win on that, and it wasn't about saying don't do this redesign because I mean there's all kinds of strategic reasons why they want this, and it was better for users. It was about saying just like let's pause. And let's see if we can figure out why this is performing worse in the SEO test portion of this, and like iterate a little bit, tweak some stuff, then launch it. And like that wasn't an SEO win in the sense of like you can't say look at the uplift, but you can say look at the downturn that we avoided, which is sometimes more valuable. But, kind of an important thing, I think.
Out of curiosity, what was that difference? Then on surface,
we've seen double-digit percentages. I think that one was like minus 20-something% organic traffic.
I mean, more so like what was the actual change that you changed to fix it?
I can't remember on that specific example, but I think typically it's there's some that you might pick up in an audit. So it's like key pages are missing their structured data, or they're missing we've messed up the metadata on these pages, or like whatever it might be. I think some of these were more like content had moved behind behind a tab on the page, or that had shifted around on the page, or that kind of
maybe like sense of importance might have changed.
So some of that kind of change.
Yeah, it's actually we have a cautionary tale there. We own a site internally, and we launched a redesign. We think it looked way better, and realized. And I don't think we're stupid about SEO here. Maybe we should have contacted you about a tool, and then realized a few things were missing after like thinking about it deeper. We did QA tests and stuff like that, and it would have been nice to have a tool like yours to kind of run through and realize that something was off there. And it was interesting, and I think it also should be a cautionary tale for people. I think Google slowly crawled our site, and then it wasn't like tomorrow it tanked. It was just, I think there was internal linking problems specifically in our case, and it slowly started traffic going down. I mean, it wasn't. Yeah.
I think this is the problem, and especially when it's negative impacts that come gradually over time. So you can't be like, oh look, on that day we fell off a cliff. It's sometimes especially compounding negative effects. This is one that I think about quite a lot, is if you're continually making recommendations, you're continually kind of working along, and there is a lag, you could easily end up with this kind of blended result. So like some of your recommendations were good, but some of them were bad.
Yeah.
And
you
end up kind of going sideways. But when in fact what you've done is some have been good and some have been bad, but you can never unpick that. You can never go back and kind of try and figure out which were the bad ones, because there's no correlation time-wise. And so that's why we're investing in that side of things. That doesn't help with the big content type stuff or the external link So it can help with internal link testing sometimes.
Yeah,
but,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thought I had on the thing that it's not an SEO recommendation. We heard about a site that unfortunately got sued because they didn't have disability best practices for image alt tags. So I wouldn't say don't add that.
I'm not saying that either.
I may actually go run and add that if you're watching this, because
Yeah.
you don't want it. There's unfortunately some shady lawyers out there who are like literally looking for sites. I mean, of course, and that's just good best practice and ethical to do it.
Right.
But
I guess some of this is about how you communicate it internally. It's like you can't make, in my opinion, you generally for that kind of change can't be making the case that this is going to bring us X% uplift
yeah,
or
that's true.
Whatever else.
Yeah, it's all about prioritization. So I know you're like kind of a futurist as it comes to SEO in general, and you always have a lot of great presentations there. I don't know if there's anything you're currently thinking about now that you're kind of moving your agency towards, and
so I'm trying to resist pushing our strategies too much towards the futurists. Like, that's where I geek out. That's where I'm like most interested personally. But we've definitely seen in the past that just because something might happen in the future, that like you can't tell when it's going to happen, and there's little ROI in being right too soon. So I think
go real bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's somewhere it might happen as a ranking factor in the future, but it's a benefit now. UX recommendations, right? Like, there's no harm in having a better click-through rate from the search results. In fact, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a ranking factor, like that's okay. You can still go and do that. And that's why we're testing some of that stuff. Is you think about paid search and how much energy and effort in a paid search campaign goes into improving the click-through rate from the ad, compared to how little energy most people put in to improve the click-through rate from their organic listings. Huge untapped potential there, even ignoring any potential of ranking factor. So I'm kind of trying to stay pragmatic, I guess. I'm like, I want to be doing stuff that works right now. Like the history of where we've come from, we kind of came always from this. We started working in small business end of things. We started in web design. It was always about effectiveness. Like, small businesses can't afford to do something that might work in a decade.
Right.
And so, yeah, I geek out there, but I'm trying not to push our strategies
too
towards
far.
things that might just work one day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious your opinion, and you've probably spoken on this, so apologies for repeating, on voice search specifically. Like, I think, and my general recommendation to our team is optimize for the quick answer, and that's kind of directionally will solve for that.
Yeah.
Is that would echo
so
that?
that was 100% of my answer. And I even wrote a post last year sometime where I did some kind of back of the envelope calculations to kind of say, okay, look, if we think there's this much desktop search volume, there's this much mobile search volume, make some assumptions about growth of home assistants, growth of voice search on mobile, all these kind of things, and then, okay, how many of those searches do we think are returning anything other than the one box, right, or the quick answer? And I did back of the envelope kind of thing, and I'm like, there's only 100,000 searches a year in total across every market that right now are returning anything unique for voice search. And so if you're, so don't do anything differently. Like you say, just do the thing that you'd be doing for the quick answer off the one box. The one caveat that I would give to that is I love being proven wrong when new evidence is great.
Right.
And so I had this rant kind of post where I laid out all my assumptions and tried to make my argument. And I published that, I think, in September last year. And then we had a London conference in October. Okay. And we had a guy called John Campbell speaking at our conference about voice search. And he was like, first of all, thanks for setting me up for failure here. But then he was like, I want to tweak my presentation and make it like a rebuttal to he wanted to make his presentation a rebuttal to my blog post.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, great, fantastic. Stand on stage and present data that shows that I'm wrong. And I'm all about that. And the one thing that he had that is convincing, with some other caveats we'll come back to, but basically is what's it called? Implicit invocation, I think they call it.
Okay.
So this is Google only at the moment. So this is not Siri or Alexa. So on Google, if you search, if you say something like, "Okay, Google, show me, tell me house prices in San Diego."
Expensive.
I'm sure. Same in London. He built this app that essentially was a voice search bot that could respond to this. And unlike on Alexa, so on Alexa you have to say like a really specific sequence of things to get what they call a skill. To get a skill to answer, you have to say, okay, Alexa, ask the house price bot what the house prices are like in San Diego or
Okay.
something like that. On Google, they have what they call implicit invocation, which is if there is a bot out there that can answer your query,
Okay.
then under certain circumstances, it will say, I have an answer for you from this thing. Here's the answer. The median
Okay.
house price in San Diego is X. And then you can interact with that bot. So you can say, okay, Google, thanks. What about LA? And,
Okay.
it will do the conversational query, and it'll give you a house price in LA. Now, that was something entirely new. That is something where that's not the one box answer. This is not a web page at all. There is
Okay.
no website here. This is just happening via the API and the integration with the skill, essentially,
Okay.
is what Alexa calls it. But Google is doing the implied invocation. In other words, you didn't have to know the thing exists, the answer service existed before doing the query. And he did a study where he basically launched a house price bot in the UK,
Okay.
and he did effectively rank tracking. And overnight, a huge chunk of those queries, like
Went to
house
him.
prices in location, switched from being the one box answer to being his bot's answer. So
Okay.
I'm still not saying there's massive opportunity here yet, because this is only Google. This is only in certain markets. Like, there are
okay.
other caveats, but that's the one thing that makes me think that the future potential is bigger than I perhaps had immediately envisaged.
Okay.
And certainly there are some spaces where maybe it might make sense to think about having one of these
More.
skills or one of these voice bot. Answer
Yeah, that's
capabilities.
interesting. So I guess that would be the takeaway for SEO is like if you're big enough.
Experiment with
Yeah,
this
yeah,
stuff. Like,
play
if
with
you've
it,
got
yeah.
if you've got that kind of R&D budget, then like sure. But I wouldn't be doing that
Congratulations.
instead of making your website better.
Yeah, that makes
So-
sense. So, I mean, we talked a lot about SERP analysis as it comes to link building specifically and also A/B testing. Is there anything that comes top of mind on that specifically that we didn't mention that you're thinking about or recommend to people?
So the top of mind conversation, literally it was a conversation in our Distilled Slack this morning, was actually led again by Tom Capper. So the same guy who developed this two-tiered SERP thing. He's going to be writing a post shortly, I think, about an opinion he holds of domain authority being a poor metric for reporting on link building acquisition activities.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of a fascinating one, I think, because it feels like the entire industry has fallen into, and I hold our hands up, like we're guilty of this as well, of kind of saying, hey, this this creative content got links from a DA80, a DA90, whatever else, and it kind of maps to our intuitive understanding of big website, I guess. Like, hey, we got a link from National Geographic. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
and it's kind of a way of communicating good thing with numbers, I suppose.
Okay.
So I see why we do it, but that's not what domain authority is. Domain authority is supposed to be about the ability of that website to rank. It's not a page rank, and it's certainly not a page rank of the page you got a link from.
Yeah, for sure.
And like you could get a link from a National Geographic page that is entirely orphaned on National Geographic, has no links from anywhere else on nationalgeographic.com, maybe doesn't even have any links from anywhere else on the internet.
Yeah.
And like, is that a good thing? I mean, yes, it's better than not having that link. It's certainly a good brand to be associated with. But is it a
pass a lot of value.
is it going to pass a lot of value in helping
not.
you rank? Seems relatively unlikely to me. And so, he's basically going to, I think, put forward this argument that clients, we need to educate the whole industry. We need to educate clients in particular about what they care about. But we should be looking at links that send traffic, which obviously you can't know on day one. But so I think it's like some of these metrics don't exist on day one. We were talking about this earlier. Like page authority, for example, is not a thing that exists for a new page on the day that the page is created. So
it is now, actually.
Okay.
I think that historically for us was the reason we didn't do it, because you go to Open Site Explorer, now Link Explorer, and it said one PA.
Right.
And actually, when I saw Tom's tweet yesterday, I was like, oh, is that still the case? This is why we don't do it. And it's not the case anymore. I don't know how great
I don't know how accurate that is.
they are.
So
it can't be
But
perfect.
I think basically the argument is like, okay, we could maybe start with a domain metric, move to page metrics as they get updated, move to like traffic metrics when we're reporting on it a month later.
Yeah.
These are more aligned with what Google is trying to achieve. Like page rank originally was reasonable surface stuff. So why not look at actual traffic? Because that's actual
relevant.
surface.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I think, what Russ Jones and Moz are trying to do with their new domain authority update. Hopefully, I think that's what he said, is look at traffic specifically.
To calibrate some of that stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely. But it's just about trying to get our mindset around what are these metrics, what are they for, and use the right ones in the right circumstances.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, it's almost an old school thing. We thankfully don't get these requests as much. If people wanted EDU links, And to me, it was like, oh, edu links are great, but if they're just orphaned or behind JavaScript or like what
if
have
you're just
you,
doing it because it happens to be edu, it's kind of similar
the
things.
same
Like, oh, this is
concept.
a DA94. It's like, yeah, fantastic, but like, yeah, you just got that onto a page they don't know about. Like, that's not actually beneficial, right?
Nice.
So,
yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Any final thoughts or anything like that?
No, this has been great. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been great to come visit, and yeah, thank you for having me.
I guess I got the second. I really respect everything you guys put out. You're really smart from a technical SEO perspective and strategy perspective, and respect you guys greatly. So appreciate you coming in, and yeah, thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Yeah.